It is my pleasure to introduce our platform speaker today, Dr. Jeffrey Bonner. Please welcome him.
It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I have to say it's also a pleasure not to be at my house. We're redoing our hardwood floors, and if you've ever done that before, what it entails is packing up everything you possibly could own and then not going anywhere. So it's been depressing and difficult. But anyway, this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about our new development, WildCare Park, and then a very, very short, quick look at the St. Louis Zoo and what's going on there, and then hopefully have a little time to do talk about some of our WildCare centers. At least I'd like to get in a couple of them, maybe one here in Missouri and one in Africa. So what time exactly did you want me to stop? I didn't.
I think if you could go to 45 or 50. You see that from here?
Oh, sure, yeah, okay. So first slide, I don't know exactly what's up there. I'll have to keep turning my head a little bit. Second slide. So WildCare Park is really two completely different entities, if you could advance that. On the one hand, it is a conservation center. Please forgive me, I'm going to have to keep doing this. It's really two different places in one. And one side is a conservation center, and what we're doing there is research on and propagation of endangered species, some of them critically endangered, some of them extinct in the wild. And the zoo has wanted to do this since the 70s, so this is not something that's new with my generation of leadership at the zoo. In fact, this original facility was originally planned to be out at Bush Wildlife Center off of 94 and 4064. That did not work out. And we've looked at a couple other places since that. It's a very, very important thing to do. And as we'll see in a second, it turns on the fact that many of the species that we're working with really, really need our help, and frankly need your help too. And I should, at this point, just thank you for supporting Proposition Z, the sales tax that allowed us to do this. That's a St. Louis sales tax. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so the other component of that is I think, a pretty dynamic public experience that I'll get into in just a second. Very, very different from the St. Louis Zoo. The difference for me is that at the St. Louis Zoo, the animals are like here, and you're like here. And at WildCare Park, it's more like you're here and the animals are here. So completely different feeling, but I think very compatible. So where are we located? If you go out Highway 270 to the last exit in Missouri, and then go left up what at that point is Riverside Drive, but it becomes Columbia Bottom Road. And about 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes up the road, you'll find this wonderful property. It used to belong to the plumbers and pipe fitters, about 425 acres. And it's bounded on one side by a county park, Spanish Lake County Park, and on the other side by Columbia Bottom Natural Resource Area. So we really have tremendous buffer on either side, and actually to the north it's still farmland. It's sort of surprising to some St. Louis County residents that so much farmland still exists in St. Louis County. And that's probably the last place where it does exist. But tremendous buffers there. And that's actually very good for us, because one of the things we don't want is people really close by the conservation breeding work that we're doing. Can I have the next slide? Why don't you just hand me this so I don't have to... Thank you. So the property is really beautiful. It's just stunning up there, especially this time of year. We look at the existing conditions. It's pretty in the fall, but this was a golf course. So, and they did a beautiful job on it. The original concept was sort of as a poor man's country club or working man's country club. And they actually had the third largest swimming pool in the world at one point up there. So it's still there, it's just filled in. We know because we tried to drill through it and that didn't work out so well for us. But next slide, I think, shows some of the shots that we took more in the summer. So the next slide is our site plan. And I want to just give you this quick overview and then drill down into the conservation and animal science side. But you can see that the east, or from your view, that would be the right-hand side of the slide, is a conservation breeding area. It focuses almost entirely on ungulates, so hoofstock. which is very, very difficult to do in a zoo, especially a zoo like our zoo in Forest Park, which is really right around 100 acres. And that doesn't really leave us a lot of room for breeding animals that take up a large amount of space. And the western side of it is basically guest experiences with a sort of a core area right in the middle that has parking and some of the visitor amenities. So let me talk now about the Kent Family Conservation Animal Science Center. That's next slide. And I want to talk a little bit about going on the conservation pastures. And so ungulates really do need a tremendous amount of space, and many of these ungulates, of course, critically endangered. So what we're doing is creating basically modular construction. They're nothing fancy. They're the simplest of barns. And the idea is that over the next 20 years or beyond, we can rotate different species through depending on need. And as I mentioned, we want a certain amount of privacy, and that part of the site affords the greatest amount of privacy. We're also looking at some other taxa like herps, amphibians, and reptiles, and we'll have to see how that goes. The next slide, please. People ask, well, really, what difference can you make with a relatively small number of animals? And so I'm going to throw up a few of them here and just give you a sense. We work with the African wild assets from Somalia largely, and anything that's good to eat, frankly, is gone in Somalia. There are populations remaining in Eritrea. We have no clue how many. If you said it was less than 100, I would believe it. We say only 600 left in the wild to be on the safe side. But there's only 74 in North American zoos, right? So adding 50 individuals to that would increase the population of Somali wild ass or African wild ass by 68%, which is pretty stunning. Another example would be Persian onager. Again, endangered in the wild. They're from Iran. We stake only about 395 left in the wild. Obviously, that number can go up or down. There's only 34 in North American zoos. So if we're going to do a release of these species, 50 more individuals would increase that population in North America by 135%. They're very difficult to keep. They're just mean. They're just plain mean. And I guess if you have to get by in the high desert of Iran, it probably helps to be just plain mean. But they're very difficult to keep, so you're not going to find a lot of zoos having them. And with that kind of number left in the wild, it's only a matter of time before they have to be reintroduced. The next slide shows addax. They're sub-Saharan, largely in Niger, the remaining populations. We think between 30 and 90 left in the wild. It's very, very difficult to census them because they're in such a broad area and their density is so low to begin with. But we do know that it's 234 in 24 different U.S. zoos. If we just added 50 more individuals, it'd increase the nation's population by 21%. Not bad. This slide says that slated for early next year. This is an older slide. We actually did reintroduce addax earlier this year. And some of our addax are now back in the Sahara. I should say that scimitar horned oryx were extinct in the wild, and there was a reintroduction that St. Louis was a part of, but not a huge player. And we used that infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure, but also the political infrastructure, to reintroduce addax back into Chad. So it's not really where they're from to begin with, but the environment is so close, and Chad is so much safer. And they did have a reserve that we could utilize for that purpose, and it's sort of a boot camp, get them used to being back in the wild and then turn them loose. Next slide shows mountain bongo, 70 to 80 left in the wild. They used to be found in 3 different areas of Africa, including the Aberdares. Now there's only one population left. It's at Mount Kenya National Park. So 181 in U.S. zoos. 50 more individuals, again, increased the population by over 25%. And we have reintroduced bongo as part of a program that actually didn't go as well as we would like it to go. And there's some fascinating reasons behind that. We don't have time to talk about them this morning. But Dama gazelle, again, Saharan species, critically endangered. We think 100 to 200 left in the wild. 183 in U.S. zoos, that's not too bad. But again, 50 more individuals gets that population up by about 25%. So, and we're just getting ready to reintroduce Dama gazelle. And I'll just talk about saving multiple taxa. WildCare Park really could be a national leader for these kinds of reintroduction. initiatives. And all of the species that we're going to have up there, at least in the conservation side, are species that are critically endangered and for which there is a recovery plan, or for which there could be a recovery plan thanks to the St. Louis Zoo. So let me just throw up the potential species for this facility, and you can see some of the species I talked about, as well as pea horses, some of the other animals. That pea horses have been reintroduced to the wild, but we could continue to augment that population. So several different species. Let me just briefly digress for just a second. We also have a property in Franklin County, the Sears-Lehman Wildlife and Conservation Area. And we actually are doing American red wolves up there. Are you all familiar with the American red wolf at all? A few, sort of. That's America's wolf. It was found in America from Texas, really through the eastern seaboard. The only species of wolf that was found in America and only America. And they're down to a couple hundred animals. I can't remember the exact number. And I think we're down to a handful left in the wild in North Carolina. And that number is probably going to go to zero pretty soon. Actually having a very difficult time being persecuted by hunters, and as well as not really being able to navigate cars very well. So they get a lot of fatalities that way. But if we could get that population number to about 400, then U.S. Fish and Wildlife would do another introduction. So they're counting on St. Louis, not so much to key that introduction effort, although the animals that we'll have out at Sears-Lehman will either be reintroduced themselves or their offspring will be reintroduced to the wild. We would have to have a large enough assurance population that if the next reintroduction doesn't work, and the last one, let's face it, didn't work, we would still have enough animals left to try one more time. So let me switch over to the public area, the next slide, the proposed guest experience. And everything in here is proposed, because if you've ever designed a facility this big, and frankly, there hasn't been a new zoo built in the United States since Disney's Animal Kingdom, so it's not like we all have a lot of experience doing this. But so you'll see proposed and maybe and we could and a lot of different things like that. But let me begin with the zooseum. Next slide. Zooseum is a term that we coined. I don't know if that's the name that will stick, but basically what we wanted to do was take the best of an interactive science center. And those of you that know me know that I spent the first 10 years of my career, starting 40 years ago, building the St. Louis Science Center, part of the team that built the Science Center. And so I have more than a passing familiarity with science centers, but what we wanted to do was take the best of a natural history museum, the best of a science center, the best of a zoo, and combine them. And we have a giant building that was the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Assembly Hall. And we couldn't afford to build that now. It's an incredible building. And so we're looking at what we might do there to create a sort of an indoor experience for people of all ages, I would hope. But if we have the next slide, I think the main experience will be keyed by two different safari tours. Sort of a southern safari, which is the southern part of our property, which actually looks an awful lot like a savanna. Beautiful rolling grass hills. If you play golf, it's link style. Dotted with trees, just perfect for giraffe. And then a northern safari where it's a little more rugged, a little more ups and downs, and we would like to, if we can, feature rhino there. It might be that we just go with a cold weather species. You saw some of the species that I was talking about earlier. There's a whole bunch of species from the Tibetan Plateau, the Gobi Desert, and a couple parts of China that are really, really, really critically endangered. And it might be fun to do those. Things like Bactrian camel, which, wild camel, those are the two-hump camels, that are winter hardy, so we wouldn't need to build expensive barns. Barns for rhinos are really very, very expensive. Of course, they have to be very big, but then rhinos are big. So we have the proposed tour that would be part of the admission, the two different routes. And we would send vehicles out. We're not exactly sure what kind of vehicle, but maybe 50 to 60 people. The nice thing is that we can move them around. They would just go on gravel roads, which are permeable, and maybe have 15 or 20 vehicles in use at a time. It kind of depends on how popular this turns out to be. The next slide shows some of the animals that you would see on the northern safari loop. And the point there is that there's going to be some pretty big birds out there if we can navigate that. You see a secretary bird behind me. Looks like vulturine guinea fowl. No, regular guinea fowl. Sable, roan, and so forth. So I think just a nice mix of colors and sizes and shapes. And if you go to the next slide, looking at what we might have in the South Safari, giraffe would key that, but we could have several other. There's vulturine guinea fowl, you little devils, hiding on me again. Ground hornbills, a lot of different species. Again, try and keep that mix so that people are kind of turning a corner, rounding a bend, coming up over a rise, and seeing a little herd of animals. Next, we do have, of course, sort of upcharge safaris that will really can go off-road, make stops, and have the ability to touch and feed animals. And then next, proposed behind-the-scenes safari, which is also would allow people to get into some of those core conservation areas. If you've been out to San Diego's Wild Animal Park, you kind of know the drill. They have a lot of different things that you can do. And then we call the ultimate safari a safari that's actually an overnight safari and I'll come back to that in just a second. Right now we're looking at building a lake, so the next slide shows the proposed water safari, I think. There we go. This is actually a shot from Brevard Zoo in Florida, and I did this a long time ago, and it's really spectacular. You can't actually dock the kayaks. There's a little bumper in the water, so you can't get, but if you can sort of imagine the floor of this assembly hall being like the water, and your head maybe a little below the stage, and then seeing 14 feet of giraffe above you, it's really very spectacular. The next slide shows something that I'm sure we'll do, which is the Safari Observation Tower. It's about 11 stories tall, and the reason why I really want to do it is because from here you actually have a great view of the Gateway Arch and also the confluence, and I think a very different kind of view of the safari, so that could be kind of fun. Next slide talks a little bit about glamping, which is a word I didn't know until I started doing this, but it's glamorous camping, which apparently is not camping at all from my point of view, but maybe from yours it's camping, I don't know. And we have some beautiful locations to do that. There's just a stunning lake on that property, very similar to Sunfish Lake if you've been to Spanish Lake County Park. And then the next slide, a little nature adventure area. We've managed to keep most of the hardwoods that were there in the center of the property. And you could probably put 2 or 3 golf courses on just where they put the front 9 alone. So there's a lot of treed space. And if you go to the next slide, it says, with admission. So in other words, if you're actually from St. Louis County, you don't pay for any of this stuff except for the upcharge kinds of things. But if you're from out of St. Louis County, you have to pay admission to get in. But this would be included as part of the admission, as would the 2 safari tours and other things. So it would be part of the admission price. We're actually still looking at what that experience might entail. At one point, the architects had like $20 million in for this nature experience, and we're saying, it's nature, it shouldn't cost anything to do this. Architects can be difficult sometimes. And the next slide shows one of the things that we thought that would be fun, and if you got into this, you'd probably be getting into $20 million. This is a shot from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake in New York. And then the next slide, proposed aerial adventure course. You see these a lot in different places. Just a fun way for younger people to enjoy the outdoors. And then the next slide, just an array of educational programs. We can do things differently out there than we could do at the St. Louis Zoo. St. Louis Zoo is nature, I guess, but it's heavily curated nature, right? There are things that you would never find in juxtaposition in the wild, but annuals and tropicals and banana trees and flowering shrubs and so forth. It's a wonderful plethora of stuff, but that's not nature from my point of view. So next slide. We think in many ways this is the future of zoos. I think that these landscape scale types exhibits and presentations will probably become the norm in the next 20 to 25 years. I think that there will always be a place for a great urban zoo, but I think that what you see at the St. Louis Zoo 20 years from now won't look anything like what you see today. I think what we in the zoo business call charismatic megafauna, which actually translates as elephants, would more likely, and rhino, species that are very large, giraffe, would be more likely found at our facility up north. So, if you flip to the next slide, what's new at the St. Louis Zoo, and go beyond that to the strategic plan side, we actually have been planning what we want to do both at the zoo and at WildCare Park for some time, and the plan that we've organized is basically around the themes of connecting people with animals, creating new spaces, and conserving wildlife. So that's what's driving our plans. Right now, we have the Emerson Dino show. I think it just closed. So if we could go to the next slide. They'll be in there for a while we do, I think, the most important thing that we can do right now, and that is recreate or create anew some sort of family and children's area in what was the children's zoo. And I think that area was due for a refresh for a long time, and we had planned to do it. And then COVID struck, and it put our planning off, but it actually made us more inclined to close it early because so many of the experiences there were high touch, high contact. They had to be facilitated by docents or volunteers, and that didn't work very well for us in a COVID environment. And the next slide shows the thing that we just opened this year, Primate Canopy Trails, and that is not completely open either. There's a crawl-through tunnel that goes right through one of the primate exhibits. If you haven't been up there, really you should go to see it. It's a blessing for our primates, monkeys and lemurs, because many of the species that we have up there had actually never seen the sun, never felt breeze on their face, never felt grass underneath their feet. So that I think was a real welfare consideration for us and something we wanted to do something about. So, and last slide, I am retiring. This is the "you can kiss me goodbye" slide. I don't know who called it that, but I'm not really going anyplace. If you go, one more slide, I want to quickly introduce Dwight Scott, who's my replacement. I don't know how many people have read about Dwight, but he is currently the executive director of the San Diego Zoo. It has been for some time. And he really wanted to come back to St. Louis. He is from Chillicothe. His wife is from right here, I think from South County. Family all over the metropolitan area. So, and he's here all the time. He comes back to visit with his wife's family constantly, and he's been bugging me for my job for about 10 years, so I'm just thrilled that he can no longer do that because he finally got it. So I promised I just have like 5 minutes left. Let me just take a couple minutes and talk about some of the conservation centers. So the WildCare Institute is our conservation arm, and it's our field conservation arm. And we have 13 centers around the world, but a couple of them right here in Missouri. And I want to quickly talk about one of them, and that's our work with hellbenders. Hellbenders, for those, how many know what a hellbender is? Wow, a lot of people. It's a well-educated crowd, isn't it? So they're big honking amphibians. They're about that big. And if you've canoed in Missouri's fast-flowing streams, you've probably gone right over them and not known it. They live under flat rocks. They're singularly ugly. Eat crayfish, and there's two subspecies, Eastern and Ozark, and we're the only state with both of them. And both populations crashed in Missouri, in particular the Ozark, which is now listed as critically endangered, although we probably, when they go back through to do the listing again, thanks to the St. Louis Zoo, it probably won't be. We figured out how to breed them in human care, and we've now bred and released about 9,000 of them. So we have stopped that raging tide toward extinction for this particular subspecies. But the question is, what caused their demise to begin with? And we've come up with all sorts of different things. A canoe is shuffling their feet and disturbing the fry, or siltation. And I think the leading contender for an explanation right now, at least in my mind, is that there's something in the water. And amphibians are really good, you know, as far as being like the proverbial canary in the coal mine. They live in water, they breathe water, they eat stuff that grew up in water, so they're very sensitive to changes in the water. And it's hard to say what is in the water that's causing that. But let me throw out one hypothesis, and let me begin by saying that sperm counts in Minnesota men are higher than those in Missouri men. Okay, you're wondering where this is going to go, aren't you? And sperm counts in Missouri urban men are higher than Missouri rural men. And we think that that too is related to something that's in the water. And we think it's an estrogen disruptor, endocrine disruptor, most likely estrogen or an estrogen mimic. So people will tell you that when you throw a plastic bottle in the water, it takes a zillion years to degrade. And that's absolutely true, but it begins to give off a chemical that looks suspiciously to our bodies like estrogen almost immediately. Well, immediately. And there are also, thanks to canoeists, thanks to female canoeists, thanks to young female canoeists who are on birth control, there's also a regular supply of estrogen that's going into those waterways. And what we think might be happening is that those hellbenders, we're feminizing the males. And that could be what's causing their demise. So now that we've solved the proximal problem of not having enough hellbenders in the wild, we've reintroduced 9,000 of them, now we're looking at what caused them to go extinct in the first place. And if you think about it, that could only happen in a zoo, right? Because the zoo is the only place where we can systematically alter variables in the water quality, and determine what's affecting those animals, right? It may take us a long time. We're going to probably have to go through cycles of reproduction and tinker with dozens of variables, including water temperature, rate of flow, and other things that don't have anything to do with chemicals in the water so much, before we figure out what's causing their extinction. And that's the true power of zoos. People think about the power of zoos as being able to engage in some sort of reintroduction program, augment those wild populations. Certainly we do that, and many, many species at the zoo have gone back to the wild. That's really not the true province of zoos. The true province is this ability to actually understand the natural world, what's happening in the natural world, and then hopefully do something about it. And I know I'm running out of time, so let me just close with this thought. More people visit American zoos than visit professional football, baseball, and basketball games combined. So we have a huge audience. So we should be able to, and we should do a much better job of, talking to you about what the issues are that confront us, and maybe suggest to you things that you can do about them. And this is probably a great audience to say that to. It's mission critical as we move down the road. I wish I had time to do more examples, but I think you're going to have questions afterwards, so I'll have time to talk to any of you that want to spend some time. If I go home, I'm just going to be moving stuff out to the garage, right? So take all the time you want. And with that, I'll throw up the last slide. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are not passing collection baskets right now, but if you are moved to make a donation today, you can do so at ethicalstl.org/donate. But don't feel you have to. We recognize that this is a difficult time financially for many people. I'd like to take a moment to read an announcement that I've got here. Please join our artist, Greg Klemfers, at a reception for him after platform in the foyer. We will have coffee and treats. We will now have our final musical selection performed by Aaron and Josh. And this is not actually the 11th letter of the Greek alphabet. This is lambada, not lambda.